Global supply chains are intricate and they're exposed to all sorts of disruption. Trade wars, geopolitics, inflation, regulation, and as much as resilience has become a mantra for all companies around the world, nobody really knows what that means, how far we're willing to go, and how much we're willing to pay. So, how do we start thinking about resilience in global supply chains? How do we shock-proof, I suppose, global supply chains? Shannon, let's start with you. A macro perspective. Global supply chains have already seen stresses. COVID, the Ukraine war, US-China tensions, and now tariffs. Would you say they're agile or fragile?
Well, that's a great question. And I would actually say, as we look at these last, number of years, and yes, we can point to, disruptions in COVID where, you didn't have goods that you wanted. Really, the story is one of agility. And you saw, the whole world shut down there. And within weeks, sometimes just a few months, everything was back on the shelves. You found a way to move it around. And I would say, again, we are seeing a shock with, the United States putting on all sorts of tariffs, sort of the levels changing, day in and day out as we sort of settle into something. Other governments responding, either some retaliating like China, others responding by going abroad and negotiating other free trade agreements with other countries. So a real changing of these rules. And again, you are seeing an agility, right? You're not seeing huge changes as of yet in supply, right? Things are still, going to various countries. And, my colleagues here, are in the midst of that. They're moving it around those countries. But you're also seeing it, I would say, in pricing and the like, that there's been a lot of agility there. So a lot has not changed, even with, significant both, physical disruptions with COVID and then policy disruptions over these last several months.
Raj, agile, I mean, you move $2 trillion worth of goods every single year. When you take a look at the supply chains now, how are they different from 5 years ago?
Well, the first thing I would say is that if in 2018 or 19 we had this conference right here, this topic wouldn't have been on the agenda. Nobody really cared about supply chains. And it's gone from there to be a boardroom conversation. Now we're even talking things like tariffs and de minimis. So all the things we do have become very cool for everybody now. I think the world has completely changed. As you saw, a lot of things were taken for granted, on the supply chain side of the equation. And then when there was a disruption, suddenly there's a lot of attention being paid. But I think we've got to trace the origins of trade. And, after the Second World War, trade was 4.5% of global GDP. It peaked around a quarter. And it's kind of been there and thereabouts since then. And FedEx moving 17 million packages a day, we are a referendum on the high-value supply chain. Like you said, we move $2 trillion of commerce. We see the patterns changing quite dramatically now, especially in the last 6 to 12 months. I think we are moving from one set of equilibrium state to another, and we are right in the middle of it. And that's what we are now seeing. The word that Shannon just used, agility, is what's really, really important, both from a physical point of view and a technological point of view. I'll just finish with one point. You used the word resilience, which is exactly the right word. People have talked about, you have to be just in time or just in case. But you have to find the right balance where you're efficient and reliable at the same time, and that's where resilience comes in. And only way to do this is at the intersection of the physical networks in place and the technological networks that work hand in hand with that.
Peter, I can't help but feel like there's just too much optimism, there's agility, and we're going to be okay. There are still vulnerabilities out there. Where are they?
No, thanks for that, and it's great to be here. Let me piggyback on what we just heard as a first statement. I think this is actually not new over the last 6 to 12 months. As we heard, this started much earlier. I think earlier it was more the consumer which was driving actually to a more sustainable supply chain. And I think many companies have actually reacted to that rather earlier. But it takes a long time to change supply chains. And you have to be careful that you find the right balance, as we just heard, between the costs you have on the inventory, so you keep the products in your hand, versus actually the cost of disruption. And I think it has shifted that companies across the world in all industries are taking much more into account that the disruption effect is much more costlier compared to actually keeping your product more on the inventory side.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.